One job you would not want to have if you wanted to live to a ripe old age was a lawman. For starters, there was no formal structure of law like we have today. Every town would have to establish their own methods for dealing with crime. This meant lawmen would often use methods that were unsound by today's standards, at least according to the official rulebook anyway. But it was a wild time, and with crime rates so incredibly high, they had to do what they had to do. Lawmen had to deal with bandits, outlaws, rowdy gamblers. Every day their life was on the line. Of course, some towns were safer than others, but the outlaw towns, those were the hardest to clean up. These were places ruled by criminals and corruption, so getting a place like that under control was no small task. And what made being a man of the law even more dangerous back then was how level the playing field was. Nowadays, cops can call in backup. They have way more heavy-duty equipment at their disposal to deal with crime, but in the Old West, the criminals were packing the same stuff the deputies were: six-shooters and rifles for the most part. So you had to have some real skill with your piece. There's a reason why famous figures from the Old West era were usually renowned for their speed and accuracy with their sidearms. You were also trying to avoid death on a daily basis as a miner. Mining is still a dangerous job to this day, so back in the late 1800s, good luck. Health and safety was not the primary concern. The primary concern was doing everything possible to strike it rich. And that's the thing, for as dangerous as this line of work was, the risk to reward was pretty high. I mean, if you struck gold, you could be rich in an instant and never have to work again. It happened for some, but the majority of miners weren't so lucky. Not only was the danger of being trapped or crushed by falling rocks a constant threat, but a lot of miners suffered from poor health as well. For one thing, they worked very long hours, and mining is pretty grueling work, especially back then without the type of equipment we have today to assist in the process. Miners got sick more often than other folks because of all the dust in the mines. A good number of them would die of tuberculosis. So what if you just want to bartend? You know, serve some drinks while chatting up the townsfolk. Sure, you might have overly intoxicated patron or two to boot out of the place, but what else could go wrong, right? Well, if you've seen any Western movie before, you know that working in a saloon was not quite the same as working in a bar today. And even today, depending on the bar you're working at, things can get pretty hairy. So imagine what it would have been like for saloon owners in the Wild West. Having a firearm on hand was a must. So who were the clientele? Well, everyone else on this list, pretty much, and folks had a lot to deal with, so they were pretty high strung, you know, not always the most laid back. Sure, movies do embellish things, but saloon brawls and shootouts did happen. Even if things only went down a couple times over the course of a saloon owner's career, it would be too much. And depending on what town you were in, things would go down much more often than that. Alright, much like lawmen, bounty hunters were also dealing with violent criminals on a frequent basis. Bounty hunting could be lucrative, but it involved tracking pretty dangerous men and then dealing with them, either taking them into custody or killing them. And to say things got gnarly would be an understatement, not to mention the fact that these guys were sometimes traveling very long distances on horseback through scorching hot weather. That would get old pretty quickly. One of the most notorious bounty hunters in the Old West was Timothy Longhair Jim Courtright. He was a lawman as well, but the lines between these two gigs were often pretty blurred. Again, there was no official system in place. Now, alongside enforcing the law, Courtright ran his own protection service where he'd offer local businesses safety from thieves and vandals. But some business owners didn't like the fact that he'd try to strong-arm them into paying for his services. And one man, Luke Short, a saloon owner, ended up telling Courtright to, quote, "go to hell." This led to the two having a classic duel in the street. The two faced each other as the Ennio Morricone music kicked in. Whoever was quickest on the draw wouldn't die. Well, as renowned as Courtright was with his sidearm, this just wasn't his day. He took 3 bullets, one in the thumb, one in the right shoulder, and one right into the heart.
Starting our list off at number 10, a banker. Today, online banking is easy, right? It's a little bit too invasive at times. I don't know. I get an email from my bank. It's like, Mr. McWaters, do you want to provide for your family? I'm like, Chill, relax. Back in the Old West, you didn't get a courtesy check-in email. You didn't have overdraft. In fact, the United States national banking system, well, it didn't even exist until 1863. Before then, you'd have what were called wildcat banks. And, well, these were pretty fun. Here we go. What they would do is wildcat banks, they would take deposits for a short amount of time, collect your life savings, and then unannounced randomly, they would disappear overnight. Just take all your money and then run for the woods. How horrible is that? Imagine going to the bank the next day and it's gone. The bank's just not there. You're standing there with a card. Like, hello? Where did I put this in? You're telling me they pretended to be bankers for months at a time? Fake mustache, oh hello sir, good morning. Stamping things that aren't even real. They did all of that and then they just ran away with all of your money. That's wild. I get it now. I get it. The Wild West. After 1863, a noble profession was to work at a bank, and not screw people over for thousands of dollars. The Hudson Bay Company, Wells Fargo, these are all names that began because of these fake Looney Tune wildcat banks. So next time you see your bank call, be thankful. Don't be stressed, be thankful. They've got your back. They're not gonna run away overnight. Number 9, ranch work. Alrighty, I can't do yard work. I don't know if you can tell by my physical being, but I can't lift a brick. My back doesn't allow me to reach the floor. A weird curve in the back, I don't know. Pulling weeds physically hurts my soul. Or maybe I'm just lazy. One of the two, I don't know. Either way, the Old West would have been the end of Taylor McWaters. To be a cowboy, it meant lots and lots of ranch work. It wasn't all yees and haws and kicking around. A lot of the time you were protecting your cattle. That's stressful, right? All that meat just sitting there in the 1800s, good luck. Cowboys earned between $25 to $40 a month. Yeah, which sounds laughable now, but today that would be around $1,500 a month, which is fine. I mean, for a cowboy, I don't know, it's a bit less than. Do cowboys get sick days? Probably not. They probably just get sick. Number 8, railroad work. This is one of the few jobs from the Old West that I actively see every single day coming to work. Living downtown, they're always adding trains and bridges and not finishing any of them. And ideally, you don't want any toxic substance traveling down those lines, right? Fingers crossed. Well, back in the Old West, railroads were meant to assist the booming mining and ranching industries. Thing is, there weren't enough hands. There was not enough to keep up with the rate that they needed to. Like, who's gonna build a railroad? Who was the first person? Railroad workers, monthly, you'd make around $1,000, and this brought a wave of immigrants to the West. The Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads, they all lay over 1,700 miles. Now, making this actual railroad, it destroyed the bodies of these workers, but without it, American history would not be the same. Couldn't imagine making a railroad. That is exhausting. Number 7, blacksmith. All right, close your eyes and imagine a blacksmith. Just any blacksmith from any time. Is he bald? Does he have a massive beard? Is he incredibly strong and wildly intimidating? Yeah, that checks out. That's what a lot of them look like. Missing teeth, banging something pretty loud, that's a blacksmith. Frontier times were almost a golden time for blacksmiths, believe it or not. Hammers, horseshoes, new railroads, it checks out. No, they didn't need any chainmail, but a saddle wouldn't hurt, that's for sure. We could use a saddle. They would earn up to $200 a day. Blacksmiths were always busy in the Old West. They doubled as auto repair services really at the same time. I mean, I don't know. A guy comes in with a busted up carriage, well, now you're a mechanic. Yeah, go fix this wooden car. Good luck, you have one day. Here's 10 bucks. Number 6, journalism. Believe it or not, the newspaper business cleaned up shop back in the frontier. Everyone wanted to know what the tea was. Tucson, Arizona, for example, back in the day, back in 1831, that one town had 5 different newspapers. Yeah, even though there are only 465 residents, there were 5 different papers. That's stressful. How do you keep up with that much news? I mean, to be fair, before radio and television, yeah, there's probably lots to talk about all day long. That's pretty much all you can do, just talk all day long, so I get it. The industry provided jobs as well. It's very much like YouTube. Here, there's writers, there's hosts, the design and print staff, we have editors. It was a little easier than laying down a railroad, that's for sure. So when it came to jobs, yeah, journalism wasn't that bad. Definitely better than doing anything that has to do with this motion, that's for sure.
Number 5, comfort of the ladies of the evening. Now being that it's the Old West and there was just a shootout in the street, folks need to take their minds off of such horrors. Adding to the mix long hard days tending fields and livestock, people need to take off some steam. The local saloon is there for that. However, like a hidden menu at McDonald's, there's some other activities a man can engage in that aren't perhaps a regular service. Who the hell am I kidding? Ladies of the evening were quite common back then, actually. Naturally, it was a very dangerous job. However, if anything good can come from that, it's that in some cases these women became very wealthy enough to become the madam of their own establishments. And in some other cases, these madams were using their wealth to invest back into their towns, like building schools, doctor's offices. Imagine getting treatment from something and the doctor says, "These bandages were brought to you by Madame Dover's Wicked Wizard Vacuum Double Sloshy Slush 9000. It's a great product, what can you say?
Number 4, interior decor. We've seen a Western saloon in movies. More often than not, it's the swinging door. You know, the classic, they always kick it in, boom, and dust everywhere and all over the place. Dust gets all on people's meals, the classic. You sort of need to kick those doors open, kind of, also. Because if you go through slow, it's just weird. It like pushes your clothes back. You need that cowboy momentum. In reality, there weren't a lot of swinging saloon doors. In fact, most saloons across the West were in pretty rough shape. They didn't look like a Tarantino set at all. They looked like that one pub in that one town that one time, you know? Just not clean, not clean at all. You ride by, you're like, is that still open? How is that still open? These saloons were tiny rooms. We had stools or chairs made of fur. You know, no one's running fish tacos to tables in the 1850s. It doesn't always smell like a nice pub. You don't see something go by and you go, ooh, what's that? I wanna have that. No, that doesn't happen here. One of the fanciest saloons has to be the White Elephant in Fort Worth, Texas. It was 2 stories and it served fresh fish and oysters. Apparently it was a lovely time.
Number 3, manifest destiny. The destiny of America. There's a famous poster somewhere. It's like an angel guiding the pioneers west. It's like pointing, doing something like that. Back to the history. What is manifest destiny? Well, for our non-American audience, it was this very core belief that since America had won its independence and begun expanding west, that they were destined to do so and keep expanding. And expanding. Why should the freedom train stop here, right? Coast to coast, baby. And maybe buy Alaska from Russia, since, well, they're not really using it. Okay, and maybe Hawaii. They got pineapples or something, I don't know. Alright, maybe even heavily influenced places that are beyond US borders, but all that American influence and imperialism starts here. Imagine being the pioneer who dared to venture west, like the Great Oregon Trail, or those who crossed the desert states, and some really religious folks that found a salty lake in the desert looked at their wives and said, I need at least 2 or 3 more. God bless America.
Number 2, mixologist. You ever go to a pub, like a chill pub, dare I say a restaurant, and a dude with a mustache thinks he's in Peaky Blinders for no reason behind the bar? He's flipping bottles that don't need to be flipped, he's lighting shots on fire. Guy, it's 12:45 in the afternoon. What's your soup of the day? Where did this come from, historically? Where did the cool bartender role come from? I'm trying to order a Cosmo, but he won't stop doing stunts. In the 1800s, bartenders were referred to as mixologists. They were top dog. They had to be. They were the fanciest guys in town. We're now doing impressions of these guys today, you know, with the bow tie, and we pour it in fancy ways, because around the late 1800s, saloon owners were growing rapidly. So now you needed to have something special, something unique for the town, like say a witty mixologist who can twirl his mustache as he pours a drink without looking. Great, now the town feels special, it feels unique. Manuals for bartenders came out around the 1860s, that's when things started to get more serious. A gentleman named Jerry Thomas published a guide called How to Mix All Kinds of Plain and Fancy Drinks. Today we still have that, but now it's a red sticky binder that says meal specs and Sharpie. It's not as fancy, but it gets the job done.
Number 1, dysentery. Nothing is more horrible, more awful than catching dysentery. Trust me, I would know. I never caught it, sometimes I get diarrhea. Anyway, in Oregon Trail, the very charming DOS game. Gotta love that DOS color palette. Eye melting cyan and violet. Nice. This text-based adventure game, however, is grounded in some truth, as we can all imagine this wasn't a time of great cleanliness. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, malaria, or more commonly known as yellow fever, and even scurvy, which you usually associate that with pirates, but cowboys got it too. Which, given the conditions of the Old West, makes for a not so fruit-friendly environment. So yeah, it does make sense. Sadly for cowboys, prospectors, and everyone in between, there was a good chance you would lay down with a headache, and then the rest of your posse would have to lay you down forever in the ground, partner.
Number 10, bank robberies. Okay, when we hear about the wild, rootin' tootin' Wild West, whatever, we think of outlaws like Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch, the James Younger Gang. Apparently, it was just bank robbery central back then. Just a lot of this and tapping and riding horses and stuff. That's really not true. Bank robberies didn't happen that often in real life. In fact, during the Wild West era, officially declared from 1865 to 1900, there were only 8 bank robberies. 8. That many years ago, along 15 western states, there were only 8. To put that in perspective, in 2017 alone, there were roughly 4,000 bank robberies in the United States. Much more than 8. The first armed robbery ever in history was done by the famous outlaw Jesse James and his brother Frank. This went down in 1866. The gang of outlaws robbed the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri. Fun rootin' tootin' history. Number 9. Camels. My favorite actor growing up, hands down, was Woody from Toy Story. The guy's physical comedy was on point. And no, I don't mean Tom Hanks. I mean Woody. With this crazy little cowboy run, tipping his hat. But what's a cowboy without his horse, right? As soon as Bullseye got introduced in Toy Story 2, the picture was complete. A cowboy and a horse. We've seen this combo at some point in our lives. Everywhere. But did you know that for around 100 years, camels were part of Texas wildlife? So imagine a cowboy on a camel. Yeah, that's real. That happened. Imagine two cowboys on the humps of a camel. How silly and intimidating would that look? Back in 1855, Congress spent thousands to purchase and ship feral camels from Egypt. The hot Southwest would make sense when it comes to camels doing their camel thing. But by 1857, the army had 70 camels. Things were going well until, the Civil War happened, and then the camels escaped and all that madness, and then from then on, for 100 years or so, they bred and roamed Texas. Yeehaw, on a camel, how fun. Number 8, cowboys. Alright, since we're talking about cowboys, let's really talk about cowboys. Who were these guys? Was everybody just a cowboy off the bat, or did you have to earn it like a knight? What's the deal here? Well, the guys that we picture in our brain, like Woody, those are cattle herders, and then buffalo, thousands of them, they would roam the land to eat and find water. They would travel miles away, so the herders would follow on horseback and then drive them back to their ranch. They mostly ate beans, dried meat, obviously, and a lot of coffee. Those are the 3 main ingredients of yeeing and hawing. Am I a cowboy? I love beans and coffee. Coffee beans? Oh, don't even get me started. A classic Western outfit was the denim jeans and chaps, the leather covers that, go over your legs. The large rim hats were called Stetsons. Aside from looking cool, they were large enough to keep the sun out of your eyes. That hat would also double down as a drinking bowl for their horse. Sharing is caring. Number 7, the Bison Express. Humans are responsible for the disappearance on many wild animals in one way or another. It's usually our fault. Yeah, going back to the Wild Wild West, the year 1869 specifically, that's when the Pacific Railroad was done. It was open to the West to all these explorers, but now they were whipping across these wild lands in record speed, passing hundreds of bison every single trip. Eventually, it didn't take long for these railroads to advertise hunting excursions on these trains. So yeah, guests would climb aboard the top of the train cars and hunt on the top of the trains. Yeah, on the top they would just shoot these animals for sport. Obviously the train couldn't stop and go back for the bodies, so they would just leave them. This one man, Orlando Bond, nicknamed the Brick, he apparently shot thousands himself. He rode the express so many times his rifle caused him to go deaf in one ear. This was done purposely to deprive Native Americans of their food supply. Now our bison's number are incredibly low, something like 2% of what it once was, and humans, well, we're still pretty garbage. What do you know? Number 6, alcohol. These saloons cowboys would visit, was there a bouncer? Did you need 2 pieces of ID? What was the drinking age back then? Well, besides the swinging saloon doors, it really wasn't a fun time at all. Alcohol back then, first of all, was basically just poison. Actually, it was literally poison sometimes. They had whiskey like 40 rods and Tao's Lightning. You have a couple of those and you're literally passing out in minutes. Nobody was getting cut off in old-timey saloons. The bartender wasn't like, hey, how about a water, buddy? Let's get you home. No, it was a show. They had this one drink on bar rail called tarantula juice. Yeah, happy 21st birthday. Go throw up. It was made from strychnine, which was actual poison. So when the whiskey wore off, the strychnine would be left over in the patron's body, and it felt like tarantulas were crawling all over your skin. Ugh, yeah, I'm good with a Bud Light Lime. Thanks, man.
Number 5, Romeo and Juliet. What's it a name that which we call a rose? Any other word would smell as sweet? It's often said that art imitates life, but sometimes life can be stranger than fiction, and oftentimes really similar. The Hatfield and McCoys were 2 feuding families in the time of the Old West, whose hatred of one another runs deep. The most serious issues being family members removed, Old West style, by the opposite family, and in one case, a court battle over the ownership of a barnyard pig. But perhaps the best story to come of this feud is the love affair of John C. Hatfield and Rosanna McCoy. The 2 lovers met and instantly fell in love with each other, their families instantly disapproving of their newfound love. Similar to William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the star-crossed lovers story ends in tragedy. After multiple attempts to rekindle their love, including a daring rescue organized by Rosanna to free John C. from her own family, their love never resparked, and John C. went on to marry her cousin. It's said that poor Rosanna died of a broken heart. He loves me not. He loves me, he loves my cousin?
Number 4, bank robberies. If you're going to parody the Wild Wild West, you need a horse, you need a hat, and you need a big sack with a $sign on it. Apparently, wasn't it like Bandit Central? Weren't there bank robberies on every dusty corner in every dusty old town? No, there actually was very little, in fact. Bank robberies didn't happen that often back then. In fact, during the Wild West era, officially declared from 1865 to 1900, there were only 8 bank robberies in total. To put that in perspective, in 2017 alone, there were around 4,000 bank robberies in the United States. So it got a lot worse after the Wild Wild West. Now we're on like Wild Wild Wild, it's like 17 wilds at this point. The first armed robbery ever in history was done by famous outlaw, you may have heard of them, Jesse James and his brother Frank. This was in 1866. The gang of outlaws robbed the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri. We know all these bandits, but it's like they're just robbers, they're just bad people. We shouldn't really know them or glorify them. But they do this and ride horses, so it's kind of fun.
And the number 3 spot, Good Bad Town. On your way out west, you may come to find that the unsettled lands are full of danger, bandits, crooks, perilous weather, and the occasional tummy ache. When the town of Palisade, Nevada's railroad was expanded and people began to arrive in droves, the town boomed, but so did their boredom. Palisade was rather mild compared to the rest of the expanding West, so much so that when tourists began to complain of Palisade being nothing like the dangerous towns they read about in their dime novels, the people of Palisade acted by staging fake bank robberies, gunfights, and even Native American battles between them and the army, with sometimes the Native Americans participating. Also going as far as using real cattle blood during the staged combat. The citizens of Palisade were such effective actors that a lot of tourists began to run back to the train in fear of what they were seeing. Nothing more American than capitalizing on boredom.
Number 2, Helena Duels. Have you guys heard of Helena Duels? They're pretty intense, and they're a bit more intense than breakdancing battles, which honestly it's pretty close, but these are like right above it. Helena Duels began of course in Helena, Texas, aka the toughest town on earth. At least that's what they called it back in the late 1800s. It still is pretty close. The Helena Duel began here. There's even a movie called The Duel with Woody Harrelson and Liam Hemsworth. They showed this style of combat in a pretty brutal cinematic way. Opponents' left hands were tied together with buckskin and each were given a small little blade. It had to be short enough so you couldn't reach any vital organ. That was the trick. It was a brutal detail that made this an unusual event. But just like the Romans and the Colosseum, everybody likes watching violence. Depending what era it is, people are like, yeah, we'll still show up and watch people die, sure. People would make bets during these duels. How did anybody watch these at all? I can't even scroll through Reddit at night without seeing something awful, let alone a Helena Duel at like 4 p.m.
And the number 1 spot, I don't like your snoring, partner. There were a handful of dangerous criminals back in the Wild West. This includes John Wesley Hardin. Born to a reverend in 1853, his parents hoped he would grow up to be a preacher. He turned out to be one of the most deadliest outlaws to ever live. Hardin claimed many lives over the years, but most bizarre was when he shot a man for snoring. One night in 1871, while staying at a hotel, Hardin was having trouble sleeping due to the man in the next room snoring loudly. Hardin promptly shouted at the man to stop snoring. Irritated with no response, he fired several shots into the next room, claiming the man's life. After years of being an outlaw and spending a lot of time in jail, he was released for good behavior, where he then received a full pardon. With his full pardon, Hardin was then able to take and pass the bar exam, afterwards setting up a law practice in Gonzales County, Texas. If your lawyer has a longer criminal history than you, there's a good chance you're not going to beat the case.
Pony Express Rider. Now, if you're a Pony Express rider, which is a very interesting title, in the 1860s, it was a demanding and perilous job. The Pony Express was a short-lived but iconic mail delivery service that operated between the east and west coast of the United States. While the Pony Express played a crucial role in communication during its brief existence, riders faced numerous risks and challenges. Pony Express riders covered vast distances across diverse and often treacherous terrains, including mountains, deserts, and open plains. The varied landscapes presented challenges such as a rough trail and steep hills and unpredictable weather conditions, and the need for speed in delivering mail meant that the riders had little time for rest. They had to cover approximately 75 to 100 miles in a single ride before handing off the mail to the next rider. This demanding schedule meant limited opportunities for sleep or breaks. Riding at high speeds across rough terrains increased the risks of accidents and injuries, falls, collisions with obstacles, or injuries from hostile encounters that were constant concerns for Pony Express riders. The life expectancies of a Pony Express rider was relatively short though, due to the challenging conditions and risks associated with the job. As many riders were young and adventurous, while the job offered excitement, it also took a very huge toll on their health and well-being. Number 9. Farmer and rancher. Being a rancher in the Wild West was a challenging and often risky occupation. Ranchers played a vital role in the development of the western frontier, contributing to the cattle industry and the expansion of settlements. However, they faced numerous challenges and risks, both in terms of natural environment and the social and economic conditions of the time. Cattle rustling was a prevalent crime in the Wild West. Outlaws and bandits would steal cattle, posing a direct threat to the economic livelihood of ranchers. Ranchers often had to take the measures of protecting their herds and property, and conflicts could arise. Many ranchers were located in remote areas with limited access to infrastructure and services, and the expansion of ranches often encroached on traditional Native American territories. Tensions and conflicts between ranchers and Native American tribes were not uncommon, adding to an additional layer of risks to the occupation. But then again, I'm always on the indigenous people's side, so they had a point to fight. Beyond weather-related challenges, ranchers were vulnerable to disasters and natural disasters such as floods, earthquakes, and disease outbreaks among livestock. These events could have devastating effects on both the ranchers as well as their herds. Number 8. Saloon owner and the bartender. If you wanted a career as a saloon owner or a bartender in the Wild West, well, like all occupations in this time came with its own set of risks and challenges. Saloons were central to the social and economic life of a frontier town, but they also associated with a range of issues including lawlessness, violence, and economic uncertainties. Saloons were often rowdy establishments where patrons engaged in heavy drinking, gambling, and occasional brawls, and saloon owners, bartenders faced the risks of violence erupting within their establishments, leading to injuries as well as property damage. As well, some saloons attracted these outlaws and criminals seeking refuge or engaging in legal activities. Saloon owners could find themselves entangled with criminal events, leading to legal troubles and conflicts with law enforcement. Bartenders worked long hours in often challenging conditions, and dealing with unruly patrons and managing inventory and maintaining a clean and safe environment were constant tasks that required skills and resilience that are still very prevalent today for current bartenders. Number 7. Stagecoach driver. Stagecoaches were prime targets for bandits and highwaymen looking to rob passengers or steal valuable cargo. Drivers and passengers faced a constant risk of being ambushed alongside isolated stretches of the route. Stagecoach routes traverse diverse landscapes, including mountains, deserts, and dense forest. Drivers had to navigate rough and sometimes hazardous terrains, dealing with obstacles such as steep inclines and rocky paths, and river crossings. Stagecoach drivers were exposed to the elements and had to contend with extreme weather conditions, including scorching heat, freezing temperatures, heavy rain, and snowstorms. These conditions made traveling challenging and added an extra layer of risk, and the stagecoach drivers worked long and grueling hours, covering vast distances in a single journey. The demanding schedule and physical toll of driving for extended period increased the risk of fatigue and related accidents, but despite the risks, stagecoach drivers stagecoach drivers played a crucial role in the westward expansion of the United States, connecting isolated communities and contributing to economic development of the frontier. Number 6. Prospector and gold seeker. Being a prospector or gold seeker during the gold rush era in the Wild West was an adventurous but a very risky pursuit. It was obviously a huge time where gold was everyone's mind, and the allure of striking it and rich attracted thousands of individuals to mining sites in search of gold and other valuable minerals. However, the life of a prospector came with numerous challenges and hazards. Mining sites were often located in remote and isolated areas far from established communities. Prospectors faced the risk of being cut off from civilization with limited access to supplies, medical assistance, or communication, and the challenging terrain and harsh weather conditions added to the physical demands of the job. Mining camps were notorious for poor sanitations and crowding living conditions. Prospectors were also at risk of contracting diseases such as dysentery, cholera, and other illnesses due to inadequate hygiene practices and limiting access to clean water. The process of extracting minerals from the earth involved potentially dangerous activities such as tunneling, blasting, and handling heavy machinery. Accidents such as cave-ins, explosions, or equipment failures could also lead to injuries or fatalities.